All right, guys, welcome to Through the Bible, verse by verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. Currently, we are in 1 Kings chapter 18. This is the great showdown, right? The prophets of Baal versus the prophet, the true prophet of the true living God. And I think there's a lot of things intersecting here. One, when you think about why this showdown happened, Ahab, through his wicked wife Jezebel, have brought the children of Israel to such a low, degrading times. We don't always see this in great details. One, because it's just, you don't need them. We don't need them. But they're gory, they're debauchery, right? In other words, I mean, if we was to tell a lot of the stuff that's going on, it would be pornographic. But also there was great violence, so it would be quite graphic, right, in that respect. The worship, the debauchery, all of that. So this is one of the darkest times spiritually with Israel. So Elijah is prophesying with great witness and power, and he has called for, well, I should put it like this, he had brought through the word through the word of the Lord, he brought a severe famine throughout the land of Israel. Okay, and it's taken its toll, by the way, on people. Now he comes to Ahab and he pronounces the famine, and then disappears. No one has really seen him for about 3.5 years, other than the woman, the widow at Zarephath. Okay, and so this is this great showdown now between Jezebel's prophets, and actually there was going to be like 800 of them. There are 400 prophets of Baal, but there's another like 400, something like that, prophets. So again, it shows you just how bad this is. Okay, verse 1. After a long time, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year. So again, go present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the surface of the land. So Elijah presented himself to Ahab. The famine was severe in Samaria. Verse 3, Ahab called for Obadiah, who was in charge of the palace. And Obadiah was a man who greatly feared the Lord. Now, this Obadiah, I do not believe should be confused with the prophet or letter of Obadiah. That Obadiah is probably around the time of Isaiah's prophecy. Okay, verse 4. Then it says, and he took 100 prophets and hid them, 50 men, to a cave, and provided them with food and water when Jezebel slaughtered the Lord's prophets. Again, we're getting a glimpse of how wicked she was. Ahab said to Obadiah, go through the land to every spring of water and to every wadi. Perhaps we'll find grass so we can keep the horse and mule alive and not have to destroy any cattle. They divided the land between them in order to cover it. Ahab went one way by himself, and then Obadiah went another way by himself. And while Obadiah was walking along the road, Elijah suddenly met him. And Obadiah recognized him, and he fell with his face to the ground and said, is it you, my lord Elijah? It is I, he replied. Go tell your lord, Elijah's here. But Obadiah said, what sin have I committed that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to put me to death? I can imagine this. Obadiah's like, have I done something wrong with you? Have I, why are you telling me to do this? Now, the reason why he's saying this, because remember, they search for Elijah to kill him. They search high and low, but they could not find him. And all of a sudden he shows up, and then he says, hey, go tell, Ahab I'm here. Verse 10, as the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord has not sent someone to search for you. And when they said he is not here, he made that kingdom or nation swear they had not found you. Now you say, go tell your Lord Elijah is here. But when I leave you, the Spirit of the Lord may carry you off to some place I don't know. Then when I go and report to Ahab, and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. But I, your servant, have feared the Lord your God from my youth. Wasn't it reported to my Lord what I did when Jezebel slaughtered the Lord's prophet? I hid 100 of the prophets of the Lord, 50 men to a cage. I provided them with food and water. Now you say, go tell your Lord Elijah is here, and he will kill me. Like, man, give me a break. Right? He's really pleading here. Now, we're also going to see sometimes some of the thoughts that they had, weird thoughts, like, he's going to take you and the Spirit of God's going to catch you away. Now, he has no really reason to say that. In a sense, it's kind of superstitious, because he really has no way to say that. But we're going to see this even more so. But also notice that throughout this time, there were 100 prophets at this time. There were more. Jezebel killed them, but he was able to hide 100 prophets. Now again, because the biblical narrative, remember, we don't always get all the details. And this is one detail. This is one detail here where, again, there were a lot more voices of God, the prophets, okay? Now, Elijah was just one of the more chief prophets. Verse 15, Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand today, I will present myself to Ahab. So this is, now, Obadiah is probably still kind of like, oh my God. He's still kind of worried about this, but then he goes on and he says, okay, I'm going to trust the Lord. Okay. Kind of funny, but he acts based upon the word that Elijah gives him. Verse 16, Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him. Then Ahab went to meet Elijah. And when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, is that you destroyer of Israel? Now this is weird for Ahab to say this, since he's the one that is the single cause of the depravity of Israel. Verse 18, he replied, I have not destroyed Israel, but you and your father's house have, because you have abandoned the Lord's command and followed the Baal. Summon all of Israel to meet me at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah. So you see right here, there's actually 850 prophets that he's going to have this great showdown from. He says, the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. Now remember, Jezebel was not an Israelite. That was one of the problems. She was a pagan person. So Ahab summoned all of the Israelites and gathered the prophets at Mount Carmel. Then Elijah approached all the people and said, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him. But the people didn't answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I am the only remaining prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Now, we already know how Elijah is. We're going to see more of this later on after this chapter, but Elijah is wrong in that he said, I'm the only one. Well, Obadiah just told him, I've been hiding 100 of them. Okay, I've been hiding 100 of them myself. We're going to later find out God is going to tell him, no, they're like 7,000. Okay, so don't flatter yourself, Elijah. He says, verse 23, let 2 bulls be given to us. And they are to choose 1 bull for themselves and cut it in pieces and place it on the wood, but not light the fire. And I'll prepare another bull and place it on the wood, but not light the fire. Then you can call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of Yahweh, the God who answers with fire. He is God. And all the people answered, that sounds good. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, since you are so numerous, choose for yourself 1 bull and prepare it first. then call on the name of your God, but don't light the fire. Right? In other words, don't light the fire. Let your God answer by fire. So they took the bull and they gave it to them and prepared it and called on the name of Baal from morning unto noon, saying, Baal, answer us. But there was no sound, and no one answered. Then they danced, hobbling around the altar that they made. At noon, Elijah mocked them and said, shout loudly, for he is a god. Maybe he's thinking it over. Maybe he has wandered away, or maybe he's on the road. Perhaps he's sleeping and will wake up. And they shouted loudly and cut themselves with knives and spears according to their custom, until blood gushed over them. And all afternoon they kept on raving until the offering of the evening sacrifice. But there was no sound, and no one answered, no one paid attention. Now, this is always how this is going to happen when you see how the true God answers versus, by the way, all of the other pagan gods, they're not real in the first place. They are the figment of the imaginations of other people. Here we see God is going to answer tangibly. Now, let me also say this, that you should be very careful about how you presumably, there's a lot of people who try to presume to represent God when God did not send you. Remember, God sent Elijah, and he hadn't sent a lot of these people who tried to do that, and they get embarrassed as well. All right, verse 30, then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. So all of the people approached him, and he repaired the Lord's altar that had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Israel will be your name. And he built an altar with the stones in the name of Yahweh. Then he made a trench around the altar, large enough to hold about 4 gallons. Okay. I'm wondering if this is 4 gallons is not a lot. If you think about a 5-gallon bucket here, that's not a lot. I am not in a position to. I'm not in a position to dispute it, since I'm not kind of a scholar. I don't know the original language, but that 4 gallons seems to be not enough. Okay, when they said 4 gallons, I'm kind of doing a quick check in the King James here to see what it says. 33. Okay, let's see here. Heat on the wood, fill it with water pots, and pour it. Actually arrange the wood. Okay, so let's look at this. Verse 3, fill it with water pots. Okay, pot the pot with bottom. What did I see? Oh, 32. Okay, I got the wrong one. I made it, and they're large enough to hold about trench around. Now, okay, so this is interesting here. He says, I'm reading this from the King James, the New King James. So the same verse, 32, it says here that he made a trench around the altar large enough to hold about 4 gallons. Now, so then he says he made a trench around the altar large enough to hold about 2 seahs of seed. Now again, I don't know, I can't dispute that only, but that just seems 4 gallons is like a little, again, not even a 5-gallon bucket, right? 4 gallons, 5-gallon buckets, right? Okay, anyway, verse 33, next he arranged the wood, cut it up in the board, placed it on the wood. He said, fill 4 water pots with water and pour it on the offering and burn it on the wood. All right, that makes more sense. Okay, 4 water pots would be more water. Then he said a second time, and they did it a second time. And then he said a third time, and they did it a third time. So the water ran all around the altar He even filled the trench with water. Okay, so that makes more sense there. And at the time of the offering, now remember, he drenched this altar with water. He drenched it with water. Now remember, he mocked the prophets of Baal. Okay, so then Elijah, the prophet, approached the altar and said, Yahweh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, that at your word I have done all these things. Now I want to go back to this statement because a lot of people in foolishness seek to reproduce these kind of stories here. Notice what Elijah said, though. He said, at your word I did this. In other words, Elijah just didn't show up and go, I have faith, I'm going to do this. Now, many people foolishly do that and they get embarrassed. Notice, Elijah did this because God told him to, and in faith, he obeyed God. Verse 37, answer me, Lord, so that this people will know that you, Yahweh, are God, and that you have turned their heart back. Now, this is very important, that statement there, because as I said in the previous study, Elijah's ministry, one of the greatest ministry beyond all of this miraculous work, beyond all of the miracles that you see, the greatest part of Elijah's ministry and the greatest part of any ministry is to turn the hearts of the people back to God. Verse 38. Then Yahweh's fire fell and consumed the burnt offerings in the wood, and the stone, and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in its trench. When all the people saw it, they fell face down and said, Yahweh, he is God. Yahweh, he is God. And this is the greatest sign. This is the greatest fruit that can come out of any ministry, right? Any, when people's heart turn to the Lord. Verse 40. Elijah ordered them, seize the prophets of Baal, do not let even one escape. So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the Wadi of Kishon and slaughtered them there. Elijah said to Ahab, go up, eat, drink, for there is the sound of a rainstorm. So Ahab went up to eat and drink. Now, this is kind of a little small thing right here. Ahab went up and eat at the word of Elijah. Wow. Okay, and it's going to be, I'm laying the groundwork here, the groundwork, because it's kind of interesting. Ahab, as wicked as he is, notice he goes up and he obeys. He can go, oh, I'm not going to believe you, prophet. Okay, verse 42 again. So Ahab went up to eat and drink, but Elijah went up to the summit of Carmel. He bowed down to the ground and put his face between his knees. And then he said to the servants, go up and look towards the sea. Now, remember, he's waiting for this rain to come. Now, he's done all of this, and even though you had this fire come from heaven, Elijah still needs for it to rain, right? Else he's going to be denounced as the false prophet. So he went up and he looked, and he said, there's nothing. 7 times Elijah said, go back. And on the 7th time, he reported, there is a cloud as small as a man's hand coming from the sea. Then Elijah said, go and tell Ahab, get your chariot ready and go down so the rain doesn't stop you. In a little while, the sky grew dark with clouds and wind, and there was a downpour. So Ahab got up in his chariot and went to Jezreel. The power of the Lord was on Elijah, and he tucked his mantle under his belt, and he ran ahead of Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. Now, the running ahead of Ahab sort of insinuates that this was a supernatural running, that he outran the chariot. Again, one of the reasons, as I said before, that you see this great power, manifestation of power, should understand that there was so much wickedness here, so much evil, right? And that God testifies against that. Now also remember that we're going to see in the next chapter how Jezebel is going to respond. That 850 50 of her prophets were killed by Elijah. And the hearts of the people have turned back. We're going to see how she's going to respond to that. But as I said before, the greatest testimony to this ministry, the fruit of the ministry, is the hearts of the people turn back, that they're going to forsake their pagan ways, at least for a moment, and they follow Yahweh God. All right, guys, look. Don't forget to like and share this video, and hit that subscribe button, and submit your comments. All comments are welcome. I will see you in the next study.